non-COVID time, I use it to get across to the beautiful cycling tracks on the northern coast. It is teeming with tourists and it's often hard to negotiate so many cyclists and pedestrians there. Mark here, my grandfather helped build the Golden Gate Bridge.
Wow. Oof.
And my wife and I had our first date walking across it in the harbour side. Not looking after, we regularly cycle on the seaside. It is a beautiful ride. Very good. That's wonderful memories, isn't it?
Yeah, lovely. Nice way to go.
Indeed.
I'm going to book a ticket right now.
You can do Sydney.
Yeah.
Surely that's coming soon.
Very
April
much.
6th.
Yeah. Ruth Money and Eli Matthews, I appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks, Tim.
I'm Wallace Chapman. I am with you tomorrow, 3:45. See you then.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, the government's fixer-upper package for the housing market. Will more first-home buyers actually get a foot in the door, or are they still largely locked out? Minister Megan Woods is live. The latest MIQ worker to catch COVID was fully vaccinated, but experts say the Pfizer jab is up to the job. A former assistant principal at an Auckland school for the underprivileged is jailed for sexually abusing students. Multiple people are dead after a supermarket shooting in the US, and Aussie travellers are keen to bounce our way in a bubble, but they're scared of getting stuck and the rubbish tip rotating around in space. Don't forget, you can watch us live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with DNA. The Finance Minister denies he lied last year when he said the government wouldn't make changes to housing taxes. The housing package announced today doubles the bright line test from 5 to 10 years. That means people pay tax on the capital gain they make if they sell a house within 10 years, excluding the family home. The opposition says Grant Robertson lied when he gave assurances in September that the bright line test wouldn't be touched, but he denies that.
We're in an environment in September where we were being advised that house prices were going to drop. The opposite has occurred. In the interview that you're referring to, I didn't get that right in terms of Labor's policy, but in terms of the situation we find New Zealand in today, we need to act.
A group representing people struggling to afford their first home says the package does not address the imbalance favouring speculators. The spokesperson for the First Home Buyers Club, Leslie Harris, says it just doesn't go far enough.
It's still really, really tough for people to actually get the lending. That's the biggest problem. So things like, broadening, increasing the bright line test, etc., is that really going to help people get mortgages, and it's going to help people save their deposit.
CoreLogic figures show landlords who sold houses between October and December last year pocketed a record total profit of $6.7 billion on what they'd bought the properties for. The Director General of Health says people should not be discouraged about the effectiveness of the Pfizer vaccine in light of the case of a cleaner at an Auckland MIQ hotel. The woman tested positive for COVID-19 yesterday after receiving both doses of the vaccine, the second one a week ago. Ashley Bloomfield says it takes 7 days for the vaccine to fully kick in, and even then, no vaccine can ever provide full protection.
A 95% effectiveness rate for this vaccine is very high. Notwithstanding that still leaves 5% of people. And one of the ironic things here, or sort of it feels counterintuitive, is the higher our vaccination rates get, the more likely it is that any infections we get in the community will be amongst vaccinated people.
No new community cases have been reported today. The Dilworth school teacher jailed today for indecently assaulting students had a previous similar conviction. It can now be revealed that Ian Robert Wilson was convicted of doing an indecent act on a boy under 12 in the 1990s. At Dilworth during the 1970s and 80s, he invited boys back to his home and abused them. In the Auckland District Court today, Neil Harding, who waived statutory name suppression, gave his victim impact statement looking Wilson directly in the eye.
You were the Scoutmaster, and I felt safe with you. Then it all changed. I was devastated what you did to me. I am repulsed that you could destroy my innocence in this way.
Judge Russell Collins jailed Wilson for 3 years and 7 months. A prominent businessman has been found guilty of indecently assaulting 3 young men. A High Court jury in Auckland returned unanimous verdicts today after deliberating for 11 and a half hours. The man, whose name remains suppressed, was found guilty on 3 charges of indecent assault and 2 of attempting to dissuade a witness. He will be sentenced in May. 10 people, including a police officer, have been killed in a shooting at a supermarket in the American city of Boulder, Colorado. Jagruti Dave reports.
Officials said the police officer, 51-year-old Eric Talley, who had been with Boulder Police Department since 2010. At an earlier news conference, Boulder Police Commander Kerry Yamaguchi said one person of interest was in custody and was being treated for injuries sustained during the incident, but indicated it was too early to determine a motive for the shooting. Commander Yamaguchi added there was no ongoing public threat. Local TV stations had shown a video of a man who appeared to have blood on his leg being led away by officers, but authorities would not say if he was involved in the shooting.
Jagruti Dave reporting. It's 4 minutes past 5. The Bangladesh cricket side have upped their run rate against New Zealand in the second one-day cricket international in Christchurch. Batting first after being put in a short time ago, they were 184 for 4 in the 41st over. The Black Caps lead the 3-match series 1-0. The international rowing career of Mahi Drysdale appears to be over. The 2-time Olympic champion is not in the New Zealand squad named this afternoon. The 42-year-old lost his spot in the single scull to Tauranga's Jordan Parry, who dominated at recent trials. While this is not the final Tokyo Olympic squad, Drysdale is unlikely to be able to force his way in, as rowing New Zealand is not sending crews to World Cup regattas in Europe because of COVID-19. The final Olympic squad will be named in June. Blues hooker Kurt Eklund has been suspended for 3 weeks after pleading guilty to a foul play charge arising from the Blues' loss to the Crusaders in Super Rugby Aotearoa on Saturday. His teammate, All Black prop Ofa Tu'ungafasi, who was yellow carded for an illegal clean-out at a ruck in the same game, will appear before the judiciary tomorrow night. That's the news.
It's a year since New Zealand's first lockdown.
Work from home, homeschool kids, run a house and cope with everything else.
I felt like it was the apocalypse, but I actually had the best time during the first lockdown.
People were thinking about others.
We basically left the rest of the Western world behind. We forged our own direction with elimination.
I'd rather be in New Zealand than anywhere else at the moment.
Everybody around the world wants to live in New Zealand.
With you when you need us. Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Wellington, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Mainly fine, a few showers in Northland and cloudy areas overnight. Isolated afternoon and evening showers tomorrow from Tongariro northwards. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairatapa mostly fine. Cloud increasing later tomorrow with a few showers from Wairoa northwards by evening. Marlborough and Nelson mostly fine, however isolated showers about the ranges in the afternoon and evenings, with drizzle for the Kaikoura coast tomorrow morning and night. Bulla and Westland cloudy periods but longer fine spells for Bulla. Canterbury, Otago, Southland and Fiordland often cloudy in the south and about the coast, with patchy drizzle spreading north today, fine spells inland but cloud morning and night with isolated afternoon or evening showers tomorrow. Chatham Islands cloudy periods and the odd shower. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The government's cracking down on property investors to try and even the playing field for first home buyers and turn down the heat on the property market. It's released a new raft of measures, including doubling the time investors have to hold on to additional properties to avoid paying tax when they sell. However, other political parties are far from impressed with the measures. Our political reporter Charlie Drever and camera operator Samuel Rillstone filed this report.
Sold signs stickered on real estate boards in Wellington, happy new owners, perhaps even happier sellers. But that dream of owning your own home is a pipe dream for many, an issue successive governments have tried to wrestle. And Jacinda Ardern's governments came today. in a suite of new measures. The Prime Minister saying it's clear the current pace of the market is unsustainable.
The last thing our economy and homeowners needs right now is a dangerous housing bubble. But a number of indicators point towards that risk. Property investors are now the biggest share of buyers, with the highest amount of purchases on record.
To do this, the government will remove the ability for property investors to offset their interest expenses against their rental income. More first-home buyers will become eligible for a first-home grant by raising income and property price caps. It is also planning to speed up building through a $3.8 billion housing acceleration fund. But probably the most contentious of the changes is the doubling of the Bright Line test. Finance Minister Grant Robertson announcing it will be expanded from 5 to 10 years.
The average house in New Zealand is owned for 7 to 8 years. Extending the Bright Line test for existing properties to just beyond this mark will capture more speculative investment, while protecting investors who have just a single investment property, in effect for many of them as a form of retirement savings, and these properties are often held for longer periods.
The Prime Minister has staked her leadership on a capital gains tax. Not on my watch, she told voters in 2019. But ACT Party leader David Seymour says extending the Bright Line test is a capital gain tax by stealth.
The government's been quick to blame ma and pa investors. It won't accept responsibility itself for the fact all its policies have failed for 4 years.
Before the election, Grant Robertson ruled out making changes to the Bright Line test, but today he backpedalled.
You're referring to a specific interview that I did. I was too definitive in my comments in that interview.
Jacinda Ardern took that a step further by refusing to acknowledge any assurances had been made.
Labor was silent on that question. At that time, we were just not seeing the rampant house price growth that we are now. In fact, during the last year, we were told that house prices would come down, that potentially the housing market could collapse.
Nationals leader Judith Collins says it's a broken promise.
They told New Zealanders that there would not be a capital gains tax under their watch. They also told New Zealanders that there would be no increase in the Bright Line test. They have lied on both counts.
However, the Green Party says today's measures are a small step forward, but they want the Bright Line test pushed out further.
We should actually remove any time limit on the Bright Line test on the ability for investors to pay tax on the capital gains.
The government says today's measures are by no means a silver bullet, but hope they will help stop the bubble from bursting. From Parliament, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
Housing Minister Megan Woods joins me now. Kia ora, Minister. How much cheaper is a house going to be because of these changes, and by when?
Kia ora, Lisa. In terms of the first part of your question, how much cheaper and by when? One of the things that you will see is that actually this is trying to put affordability at the centre of everything. In terms of the when that's going to happen, we will start in terms of making payments from our infrastructure fund. That will happen in the second part of this year, but we'll be able to see the fruits of investing in the infrastructure on the lands that we already own pretty much immediately. We've already seen that with some of the money that we've invested in our large-scale projects in places like Mount Roskill.
Minister, people who are trying to get on the housing ladder here will want to know the answer to that question, which is how much cheaper is a house going to be? We can use a median price for Auckland, say. So if you look at that, how much cheaper is it going to be to purchase a house in Auckland based on the median house price, and by when can we expect it to go down or stabilise?
Well, I did answer the second part of that in terms of the infrastructure. The critical part of the package that we've released today is one of the things holding us back. Building any houses, let alone affordable houses, is actually access to build-ready land. So I've said that we will start making grants from that fund in the second half of this year, but we'll be able to get that underway even sooner on the land that we already own. In terms of how much cheaper, it will depend. We have to go through a contestable process with a number of councils, so it will depend on where in the country. It will depend on depend on the kinds of houses. But what we know is that what we have enabled Kāinga Ora to do through this fund today is actually invest in some non-market outcomes. So we can, for example, say we want to see some more affordable rental housing built on this land. That's the payback we want from this, and we'll be able to make that happen. We will have the tools to do that.
Okay, let's break it down a bit more. So you're increasing the income cap and the house price cap for first home loans and grants, right? So what do you think a person can purchase for $625,000 in Auckland?
So that is actually based on a methodology. What it is, it's the median price of the lower quartile of house prices in any given region based on the Core Logic's March 2021 data. So
sorry, you've just lost me. Sorry to interrupt, Minister, but you've just lost me there, and you may have lost a few other people. So for $625,000, what do you anticipate someone would be able to buy in the Auckland market?
So what I'm saying is it's based on the data. So what we know is what the four quartiles of housing are. So for the lower quartile, the fourth quartile of that is the median point of houses currently that have been sold in March in 2021. So it's based on evidence and it's based on data. So that's for existing houses, but what you'll see is actually there's a different price cap for new builds than there is for existing houses.
Yeah, so what kind of house is that, Minister, and where in Auckland?
So what that is a house that is in the lower quartile of houses in Auckland, and that is exactly what these first home products are about.
So is it a one-bedroom? Is it 30 Ks from the inner city, or what could you tell us about that?
That will depend on the house it is. It will depend on how many bedrooms. I'm not going to sit here tonight and give you a list of addresses, but what I'm telling you is that is based on the evidence of what we saw in house sales in March of this year in that lower quartile. It's the midpoint, the median point, based on evidence. But what we do know is, these products are always intended for people to get into their first home. Some of these will be studio apartments. Some of these will be that foot on a ladder for people to get into the housing market.
So that increase in the cap, right, the income cap, and the increase in the house price, isn't that counterintuitive? Are you not throwing more gas on the real estate fire here by just giving people more money to spend and pushing them towards more expensive houses? Doesn't that just fuel the market competition?
Well, that's a good question, and that would be true if we were doing nothing on the supply side. That's why it's so important that this package links together both demand side and supply side measures. That if we're not going to just, like as you say, throw gasoline on the fire and further fuel that housing market, we've got to have a plan for how it is that we bring more houses.
So in the short term, Minister, do you accept that it will be gas on the fire because supply takes a bit longer to punch through the system?
Well, there's several ways in which we'll do that. That some of the supply we'll be able to do on land that we already own. We'll actually be able to increase the intensification that we're doing, and that work is already underway, so that we actually will be able to bring supply through quite quickly. Yeah, and look, these first home products are available to a number of people, and we've been making record grants since we've been in government using these products. But it is still too small a group of people to cause hyperinflation. And the fact that we've sent a very strong signal to those people that we know are making a lot of the purchases that actually we need to change this and we want you to pivot towards new supply is actually going to change things. That's why it's so important we do this stuff as a package.
Okay, Minister, we've got quite a bit I want to get through before you need to leave us. So let's go to unintended consequences, right? Interest deductibles, that's going, where investors could claim interest on their loan as an expense and reduce their tax bill, basically.
Lisa, on that, what I just want to clarify there, that there is a carve-out for new supply. So what we're doing is we're setting up this package to have an absolute unashamed bias towards bringing on new supply. We're saying to people who want to invest, help us fix the housing crisis.
Okay, I understand that. So what do you think that is going to do with rents, the price of rents?
Well, I think the fact that we are carving out new supply, both in terms of the increase in the bright line and in terms of interest deductibility, is actually it does become a giant supply side lever as well. That it says to people, look, if you want to continue investing in the housing market, we're setting up a way for you to do that, but we want you to be part of the solution, not the problem. We want you to be helping us by bringing on new supply. We don't want
in the last quarter, In the last quarter of last year, 40% of the properties purchased were by property investors, right?
That's right.
That's the figure that the Prime Minister used today.
Yes.
Okay, so there are thousands of houses out there that are owned by people, ma and pa renters, who are renting them out as their retirement plan, right? You're going to get rid of that deductible. Where do you think they're going to claw that money back from? Because maybe that's from the renter.
That would be true if we were doing nothing around supply as well, Lisa. And I think that's one of the things. This is a market it operates in. But as you've rightly pointed out, that 40% of the people out there buying houses were people that owned multiple properties. We had a situation where these ma and pa investors were competing with their kids in the burbs who were trying to buy their first house. And that
what does modelling show you about the consequences for renters of doing what you were doing with the interest deductibles?
Well,
what are the consequences?
The advice we've had is because we are doing these carve-outs around new supply, that it does actually mitigate some of the things that you might otherwise expect to see. And they are only modelled. I do point to that.
So are you guaranteeing that renters won't feel the consequences of this with rent hikes as investors try to get that money from somewhere else, i.e. the person they're renting the house to?
What I'm giving people an absolute assurance is this is the first time in a generation that we're seeing a package that is actually about bringing on supply and consciously looking on the supply of affordable rental properties. We have left it to the market. It hasn't delivered that. This package is doing this, and it is addressing those fundamentals which are leading to an increase in rents. The thing that drives the biggest increase in rents is when you have less supply than you need. And what this package is doing is saying we need to get on and build some houses.
The Treasury told you that the Bright Line test, well, moving it to 10 years, would just be the same as the status quo. They recommended 20. Why don't you do that?
Oh, no, we had to look across a balanced approach to how we were going to address this. Of course, it wasn't just the Bright Line extension that we've gone with. We've gone with the package. There's also the interest deductibility in there. There's also.
But I'm addressing the Bright Line test here. Why don't you go with the 20-year recommendation?
Because as a cabinet, we looked at it as a package in terms of not just single measures.
10 years it says achieves nothing, Minister.
Yeah. But what you need to do is consider that in the context of a package, Lisa, that when we came to do this, we had to look at the balance of things.
How much of that tax do you think you're collecting? Because IRD indicated to me figures from 2018, 2019, that basically they're still chasing up half of the people that they think may need to pay that tax. So how effective is it?
So what we do know is probably each year there's around 8,000 to 9,000 transactions that would be subject to the Bright Line test. In terms of giving you an exact figure of what we collect, that's impossible to do because, of course, Bright Line isn't a category of tax. Bright Line is just income tax. That's the way it's set up. So it isn't recorded as a separate category. It's just recorded as part of the income tax take. So IR doesn't record that tagged amount. But what I can tell you is that I'm confident that Inland Revenue has the systems and processes to ensure a high level of compliance, but we also are continue to engage and monitor what's happening there. It is something like with all tax. We want to ensure that people are paying what they should be.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's the Housing Minister, Megan Woods. It is 21 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Still to come on the program, we've got more reaction to this announcement, including how it will affect first home buyers. Now, keen for your feedback on that one. What do you think about the announcement? Is it tinkering around the edges or do you see it having a material impact? Are you a first home buyer? How does it help you or not? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And on that subject, would love to hear from you as a landlord as well. How does it affect what you're doing? The former assistant principal of Dilworth, a boarding school for underprivileged boys, has been jailed for indecently assaulting pupils. 69-year-old Ian Robert Wilson admitted to premeditated offending against vulnerable boys, some as young as 12, one every week for 2 years. Wilson, who has a previous conviction for similar offending, told the court degenerate behaviour at the school was so common it had become normalised. Jordan Bond reports from the Auckland District Court.
A victim, face to face with the man who assaulted him as a child, staring him in the eye before he's sent to jail for what he did.
Well, that day has come, Mr. Wilson. You're sitting there and I'm sitting here. It feels good. It feels right. I have waited a long time. Did you not consider that I would grow up and remember your actions? Do you remember? Or was I just one of many?
Ian Wilson's sexual offending against Neil Harding was 43 years ago in 1977. Mr. Harding was sent to Dilworth at 11 years old after his father abandoned the family.
You were the scoutmaster, and I felt safe with you. Then it all changed. I was devastated what you did to me. I am repulsed that you could destroy my innocence in this way.
Neil Harding waived his right to name suppression. He could have remained anonymous. He wanted to be named publicly to take a stand against this form of abuse, urging any other abused Dilworth old boys to contact police. He was just one. Wilson pleaded guilty to 6 charges of indecent assault on a boy under 16 and one of doing an indecent act on a boy under 16, which took place between the late 1970s and 1990. More than 4 decades later, Wilson wrote an apology letter to his victims, read out by his lawyer, Steve Cullen.
I take full, complete and absolute responsibility for my thoughts, words and actions. I'm deeply sorry for the trauma and embarrassment that I caused you. I hope you will be able to find some way to heal from the hurt caused by my actions, to erase any residual thoughts from your memories and leave me with the consequences of my actions.
2 other victims had their statements read out by the Crown lawyer. One spoke of the suicidal thoughts he had and self-harm that had occurred. Others spoke of the immense trouble they had forming intimate relationships. One an emotional wreck, drinking heavily through to his 40s. One marital troubles and a divorce. Some problems still occurring to this day, the entirety of these men's adult lives. Judge Collins had submissions from a psychologist who noted Wilson himself was sexually abused as a child from age 9 through to 12 or 13. He also read submissions that degenerate activity was common at Dilworth School and normalised by other teachers there when Wilson joined as a young man.
I have no doubt that as an intelligent, qualified man, you knew exactly what you're doing was wrong and seriously wrong. You did what you did in secret and you sought secrecy from your victims. Your victims were not only vulnerable by their age, but almost invariably they were vulnerable as a result of their personal circumstances and the background.
With the aggravating and mitigating factors and terminal cancer diagnoses for both Wilson and his wife taken into account, Judge Collins ended up sentencing the former assistant principal to 3 years and 7 months in prison. Neil Harding says he's relieved Wilson's in jail, that justice has been served.
It seems you thought that you would get away with it. Times have changed for the better, and hopefully children will be safer from predators like you.
7 other men charged with indecently assaulting boys at Dilworth School have pleaded not guilty and are due to go to trial next year. After the sentencing, Mr. Harding said, "The first of the Dilworth dominoes has fallen." For Checkpoint, called Jordan Bond. Aho.
It's been confirmed the latest MIQ worker to test positive for COVID-19 had been fully immunised with the 2-dose Pfizer vaccine. But an expert says the jab is doing its job because the woman is not sick. Another person in the cleaner's household has returned a week positive, so more tests are being done. The Director General of Health confirmed the worker from Auckland's Grand Millennium Isolation Hotel had their first vaccination on February 23rd and the second on March 16th, just 5 days before testing positive. The Director of the Immunisation Advisory Centre, Dr. Nikki Turner, explains why the woman still got infected with the virus.
Well, there's 2 reasons. Firstly, is she is not sick. So she has got COVID in the back of her throat, but she has not got sick from it. So we can hope and expect that the vaccine has been working. Secondly, it is only 5 days after the second dose, so she hasn't got the full immune protection yet. What we do know is the vaccine is highly effective against getting sick. We do know that it works a bit against spreading it, but vaccinated people can still carry and spread the virus, but they are very unlikely to get sick. And this is what we've seen in this case.
Okay, so quite a bit in there. For starters, when you say they haven't got sick, can you be more specific? Has she got any symptoms at all?
My understanding is that this woman has no symptoms at all, that she is well. They have just picked up on a swab that they take routinely that she has got the COVID virus in her throat.
Okay. But she has, by all accounts, still been able to transmit COVID to someone else in her household.
That is correct. And we have always known that with vaccines, that they are very effective against stopping you getting sick. We do not know yet how effective they are against spread. Now, there's some important things here. When you are sick, you are much more likely to spread. My understanding is there is only one member of the household that has got a weak positive result. The others have not. When you are symptomatic, you spread more likely. So we know that being vaccinated makes you less likely to spread, but it does not fully stop it.
Isn't this a worry then? And here's why I'm wondering this. If you show no symptoms and you don't feel sick, you've had a vaccine, you're carrying the virus, you can spread it to someone else not knowing that you are actually ill. Because feeling sick is what motivates you to go and get tested, doesn't it? And we don't have that alarm system if you don't feel sick.
This is the importance of why we cannot at the moment stop our border protections and our PPE approaches and our social distancing and our regular monitoring for staff at the borders, because we do know that people can still carry the virus even when they're fully vaccinated. The first principles of these vaccines are protect people against getting sick. We are hoping and expecting they will also reduce spread, but it is not 100% and it never will be 100%.
So the second vaccination in this case was 5 days approximately before they were tested and showed to be positive, right? So you say it takes a full 7 days, 7 days after the second jab in order for you to have better immunity.
That's correct. So we would hope with a few more days she would have even higher immunity. However, I'd like to point out she did not get sick. So the vaccine is doing what it's meant to do, which is really pleasing to see.
But the thing is, if it takes 7 days after the second jab to reach full immunity, would it not follow that you're building to that point? So at day 5 afterwards, wouldn't you expect to have pretty good solid coverage?
We do expect that, and as I say, this woman did not get sick, which is the way the vaccines work. We do know that vaccinated people can and do still carry the virus in the back of their throat, but the ability to transmit is still there, but much lower rate.
So, to be blunt, Nikki, is this an example of the vaccine working?
This is an example of the vaccine working. A vaccine is not a panacea to fully stop the virus spreading. If it was, we could stop all our personal protection and border controls now, but we can't, because we do know that even fully vaccinated people at times can still carry the virus in their throats and spread it. It's really important to know it's not 100% blocking the spread of the virus. It's certainly reducing it considerably, but not fully blocking it. We cannot let go of all our other important public health protection for our people.
So what is our goal in vaccinating then? Is it to stop people getting sick, or is it to stop them spreading the virus, or should it be for both?
It should be for both, but first and foremost, the use of the vaccine is to stop people getting sick. So that's why we're offering the vaccine to the people who are most likely to be exposed to it. International data is accumulating on how effective the vaccines will be at also reducing spread. They will not be 100% effective against reducing spread, but we're seeing more and more data that they do quite considerably reduce the spread.
And that is Dr Nikki Turner. Ports of Auckland bosses are fronting for a private meeting with Auckland councillors as tensions build over mounting safety and performance concerns. Mayor Phil Govt last week wrote to the Ports chair, Bill Osborne, to formally express his concerns and said the company did not show a willingness to be accountable for its performance. It comes after 3 deaths linked to the ports in recent years and several injuries which forced work to stop over recent months. Our reporter Nita Blake-Person has been following this story and joins us now from the Auckland Town Hall. So Nita, what's happening with this meeting?
Well, I understand those ports bosses are getting quite the grilling from councillors. I say I understand because media and the public are excluded. It's a private meeting despite usually being quite open. Today this is behind closed doors. That's because some councillors didn't want any excuses from Ports of Auckland staff around not being totally transparent with information, and Ports of Auckland wanted to be able to speak without concerns around commercial sensitivity. So those ports bosses are presenting the latest quarterly report, which does show those 4 stop work injuries in the last months of last year, as well as crane rates and ship rates well below their targets. So plenty to discuss at this meeting.
Have you had a bit of a taste about what the ports have had to say for themselves?
The ports bosses themselves were not particularly keen to speak to us on the way in. I did manage to speak to a number of councillors and other people who'll be sitting in on this meeting beforehand. They were pretty clear that they wanted strong answers from the port, that they weren't comfortable with how things were going at the moment. I have heard from some people in there that it is, certainly a grilling taking place, that Tony Gibson, the Chief Executive, is standing by his performance though. I spoke before the meeting began to Tau Henare, who's one of the independent Māori statutory board members. He went so far to say that he thought the entire board should resign and be replaced with people who council actually got a say over, because there is that much work to do in getting the ports up to scratch. Other councils or people in that meeting, councillors, did feel that actually they needed to build on the relationship between the two organisations, build the brand, get things back on track so that things were much better than they currently are.
Thanks, Nita. That's Nita Blake-Person, who is outside that meeting, as she said, between Ports of Auckland and Auckland Council. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, what do would-be first-home buyers think of the government's Fix-It package for the housing market? Kiwi and Aussie tourist operators gear up for a bubble, and disability campaigners head to Parliament asking for a seat at the table. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening, particularly on that housing package from the government. Do you reckon it's going to do anything, and who for? Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Now, I know I've been keeping you waiting for Susanna and the headlines. Here she is.
Parliament has gone into urgency to ram through changes to the Bright Line test and its housing package unveiled this morning. The government is doubling the length of time investors have to hold on to a property to avoid paying tax when they sell, from 5 to 10 years. It's part of a suite of measures aimed at slowing skyrocketing house prices. Meanwhile, Kiwi Bank's chief economist says the new $3.8 billion fund intended to boost the supply of infrastructure for new housing is nowhere near enough. The cost of funding roads, sewerage and connections for new subdivisions has been cited as a hurdle for developers. The Director General of Health says people should not be discouraged about the effectiveness of the Pfizer vaccine in light of the case of a cleaner at an Auckland managed isolation hotel. The woman tested positive for COVID-19 yesterday, almost a week after getting her second dose of vaccine. Ashley Bloomfield says it takes 7 days for the vaccine to fully kick in. The teacher jailed for indecently assaulting his students at Dilworth, an Auckland boarding school for underprivileged boys, can be revealed as also having an indecency conviction from more than 20 years ago, involving a boy under 12. Ian Robert Wilson was today jailed for 3 years and 7 months in the Auckland District Court for offending in the 1970s and 80s. A High Court jury in Auckland has unanimously found a prominent businessman guilty of indecently assaulting 3 young men. The man, whose name remains suppressed, was found guilty on 3 charges of indecent assault and 2 of attempting to dissuade a witness. He will be sentenced in May. A man wanted by police for shooting at officers in Mount Maunganui on Friday has been arrested. The police say early last Friday morning, after road spikes were used to stop a car, and as a man ran away, he shot at the officers who were chasing him. A 31-year-old man was arrested in Hamilton East this afternoon and will appear in Hamilton District Court tomorrow on a number of charges. State Highway 1 at Oho in the south of Horowhenua has reopened after a serious crash closed both lanes. Motorists are warned there are long delays. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's get down to business now with Nicholas Poynton, who joins me in the studio. So, Nicholas, we mentioned yesterday that you're going to have some big retail results. You've got Kathmandu today. So how did they go over the past 6 months?
Well, the company has lifted its sales and its profits for the 6 months to January, and the good news for shareholders is that the company's announced it's going to resume paying dividends to its shareholders.
Is this because we're all going bush, Nicholas?
Yeah, well, maybe we're actually surfing more than we're actually hiking and tramping, it appears, from today's result, because the company, it's almost tripled its net profit on last year to about $22.3 million, but that was bolstered by some one-off gains associated with the acquisition of the Rip Curl brand. And stripping out those one-off gains, the sales were up by a third, driven in large part by the contributions from the Rip Curl brand, but also to a lesser extent the Oboz footwear brand. This company isn't just about Kathmandu, the equipment manufacturer and retailer. And this turns out that people were surfing more, and remember, Rip Curl is sold. It's not necessarily sold in just Rip Curl stores. You can buy it from a range of stores overseas. And those gains from those particular brands actually help offset some of the big falls in the Kathmandu brand. It was really affected by those lockdowns here and across the ditch that forced the closure of its stores. But the company is expecting sort of this momentum it's seen to continue throughout the rest of the financial year. Winter is a busy time, especially for the Kathmandu brand. Everyone's rushing out to buy expensive puffer jackets, and they expect that the sales from there will flow through and contribute to its bottom line. The company was also cutting costs through various initiatives. It's also working on connecting with consumers better. Things like loyalty programs, revamped websites, and this may be of interest that Kathmandu Holdings, so this is the company that owns these three main brands, they've actually hinted at a potential name change, saying that Rip Curl, it's now one of the significant contributors to the brand, and the current name doesn't really reflect the suite of businesses that it owns at the moment.
So what, Ripmandu?
That would be wonderful, wouldn't it?
Maybe people can send us suggestions. Okay, Nicholas, what have you got from the market?
So the NZX is up 65 points to 12,394. The dollar is at 71 US cents, 92.6 Australian. And shares in Kathmandu, on the back of today's result, closed up 8.9% or 11 cents to $1.35 a share.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with business there. Those struggling to afford their first home say the government's housing package does not go far enough to help them get a foot in the door and address the imbalance favouring speculators. Landlords who sold houses between October and December last year pocketed a record $6.7 billion. That's the profit made compared to what they bought the properties for. The Core Logic figures show these realised capital gains on house sales total just over $16 billion since the nationwide lockdown last March. Amy Williams filed this report.
For a $2,000 rise, one more time around the room. I'm not going to dwell. I'm going to sell it away then at $560,000.
Auckland resident Brittany is still bidding on houses at auction a year into searching for her first home.
Struggles have been finding homes that we like and that fit what we're looking for. I guess there's just not enough homes on the market, and when one does pop up that ticks all our boxes, it seems like it ticks everybody else's as well. So yeah, it's just a competitive market.
Rachel Moore is a solo mum and teacher in Lower Hutt who sold the house she shared with her husband after they divorced. She's saved up $250,000 for a deposit to buy her own house, but she says her bank will only provide her a $260,000 mortgage. That gives her a total of $510,000. And Ms. Moore says in this market that would get her a cardboard box.
If I was to take them up on that offer and manage to find my cardboard box, my rent or my mortgage payments a week would only be about $240.
That's less than her current rent, and Ms Moore says she was disappointed the bank would not loan her more based on what she's already paying. She says aside from banks loosening up lending criteria, the government must look at stopping closed tenders, lift the cap on people being able to use their KiwiSaver to add to their deposit, and reconsider a capital gains tax. Leslie Harris from the First Home Buyers Club says today's announcement isn't enough.
It's still really, really tough for people to actually get the lending. That's the biggest problem. So things like, broadening, increasing the bright line test, etc. Is that really going to help people get mortgages, and it's going to help people save their deposit?
Ms Harris says doubling the bright line test to 10 years could mean less heat in the market, but that could have downsides.
It also could be said that actually it's going to force landlords out of the market, or, people aren't going to be so keen to buy rental properties, which will just push the rental prices up further, which is then going to make it harder for people to get their deposit.
Economists say the biggest impact on investors will come when a loophole is closed that allows them to claim mortgage interest costs as an expense. The Property Investors Federation estimates the cost of providing a $600,000 rental property will increase by around $6,000 a year. But with just under half of residential investor loans sitting on interest only, the Reserve Bank is expected to limit such lending to investors. Property data firm CoreLogic tracks the market. Its head of research, Nick Goodall, says many first home buyers will benefit from the housing package, but not all.
The key question is going to be those, first home buyers or would-be first home buyers that are very low in the scale and cannot afford to buy a home today. This may not be much help for them. The increase in the cap, they're probably not even close to that cap anyway. So there's still going to be parts of the market that aren't really going to be impacted very positively from this.
But Mr Goodall expects the combination of measures announced so far will dampen the rampant house price growth. For Checkpoint, Amy Williams.
It is 17 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Now, after 6, we'll have more on the impact of this package on first home buyers. But let's get to some of your feedback now. This is on our interview with Megan Woods, Housing Minister, earlier in the programme. This listener says, regulate the rental market. If rents are kept at a reasonable level, people will be able to save for a deposit if they want to. Another person says, taxing mum and dad investors is going to do nothing to curb house price growth. Everything the government is doing will increase rents. And a landlord's got in touch, says, I'm a landlord. I'm already starting to think of when and by how much I am putting up the rent to cover the increased tax I will have to pay by doing away with interest deductible. Do keep your feedback coming. Text us on 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Tourism operators on both sides of the Tasman are cautiously optimistic about the return of travellers, with hopes a bubble will open sooner rather than later. The Prime Minister has promised to announce a date for the bubble on the 6th of April once certain conditions have been met. Tourism reporter Tess Brunton has more.
With winter just around the corner, NZ Ski is busy recruiting and preparing the Remarkables, Coronet Peak and Mount Hutt ski fields for visitors. Last year, they were domestic only, but Chief Executive Paul Anderson is feeling cautiously optimistic about the announcement.
What we would really like to know is some of the criteria that the government's using to make their judgment. If they could let us know, how many days of community-free COVID and what levels of vaccination they require, then businesses would be in a far better place to make plans for themselves.
About 40% of visitors to his Queenstown ski fields are Australian, so Mr Anderson says a bubble would be a massive shot in the arm this winter. But they currently don't have enough staff to cater for the predicted boost.
We would need to reach out for more staff, but without that certainty from the government at this stage, where we have to be careful about how much we commit to staff, because obviously we don't want to provide staff with false hope that there might be sufficient work for them.
With more certainty, he says they'd be recruiting another 300 to 400 additional staff. Half of visitors to Tekapo Springs are international, and Australia is their #1 market. Its sales and marketing manager, Andy Murray, says a trans-Tasman bubble will be a boon for business and the wider district.
This is certainly fabulous news and some light at the end of the tunnel.
There's no doubt about it. And let's just hope that it comes with some clear ways of managing it so it can actually happen. And I guess the concern, and we've all seen it happen in the North Island, obviously in Auckland, that we can keep it open and running consistently.
But Andy Murray says they will have to compete with a strong domestic marketing push in Australia.
The Australian government have recently announced that they are subsidising 800,000 airline seats. They have stumped up $12 billion package. So we've got that to compete with. So we just can't think, hey, we open the borders and Australia's going to come back full tap. I think they will come back. The million-dollar question is, at what rate?
Kaikoura Kayak's operations manager, Matt Foy, says it will provide a welcome boost to their coffers and morale.
Very excited, but also a little concerned on how it may be managed. We desperately need people back in the country from overseas. You know, tourism needs this, there's no doubt about it. The regions like Queenstown are grasping at straws at the moment. It's definitely needed.
Over the Tasman, Get Wet Surf School Managing Director Kerry Jekyll says the return of New Zealanders will make some waves in the Gold Coast with a boost to the economy and morale.
It's like we've been locked away from our cousins. New Zealand and Australia have such a great relationship. It's like we've been shut out from everybody. Even though Australia is quite big, it feels really small when you can't visit internationally. So it's just a really huge morale boost for us. And also I think it's a really good boost for consumer confidence as well.
Water by Nature Tasmania Franklin River Rafting has already had a few cancellations from New Zealanders who couldn't travel over. Its director and guide Brett Fernan says New Zealanders usually make up about 5% of his visitors, but he's hopeful that may increase.
We've had some groups of Kiwis that have come and booked the trip out. And the dollar's you're almost at parity with our dollar now, so Australia's not such an expensive place.
Last week, Air New Zealand announced it will start offering direct flights between Auckland and Hobart when quarantine-free travel is up and running.
If the flights start and then they're on for quite a while, and especially seeing that the Kiwis probably can't go anywhere else other than Australia at the moment as well, that would work very much in our favour. And also having people locked up for almost for 12 months, off and on, tends to make people a little bit more keen to get in the outdoors, and being in true wilderness is about as outdoors as you can get, and it's an amazing environment down on the Franklin. There's no midgies, so Kiwis might appreciate it a bit more.
Tourism operators on both sides of the ditch expect they'll be glued to the government's announcement on the bubble in 2 weeks' time. For Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, TNA.
Now, Jacinda Ardern has said it's more complicated to set up a bubble from New Zealand's side of the Tasman, with it being a state-by-state arrangement. So I asked the Australian Tourism Industry Council's Executive Director, Simon Westerway, what's so hard about it?
To be frank, we've got to get a two-way bubble up. We're close to doing it. We've had a one-way bubble, if you like, between New Zealand into Australia since mid-October. That's only had, as I understand, 2 very short hiatuses where, for a number of days, on 2 occasions, those coming in from New Zealand, there's around about 3,500 to 4,000 people above the coming across the ditch, had to go into a quarantine arrangement. Otherwise have in essence been free to move, just like any normal arrangement pre the virus. So we want New Zealand to treat Australia as a continent, and we don't want it to be selective, because that will really disadvantage the bubble, and it won't really deliver the benefits or start that long road back that we're looking for.
But how is it actually going to work? If the New Zealand Prime Minister says, let's do this, does every single state just then make up its own mind about how it will operate and if and when it will close its borders?
Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but in essence, your statement is actually pretty close to the mark. The Commonwealth of Australia, the federal government of Australia, led by Scott Morrison, our Prime Minister, he and the government have responsibility for the national border. So anything around international travel is a federal government, Australian government decision. That said, within our internal borders, if you like, the line in the sand or the river between Queensland and New South Wales, and the Murray River divides New South Wales and Victoria for the geography lesson. And in fact, Tasmania, there's a strait to get to Tassie. They do have their own rights to put in place their own internal border arrangements. Now that's over the past year. That's included a number of approaches. One of them has been for short periods or for longer periods, a hard border. In other cases, it's been a requirement for people that are travelling in and out of the state to either have a permit or to have possibly to have a test or in during a phase out of hard borders, they've required people to self quarantine before they or then get a test before then they can transfer. Look, it is complicated to the naked eye. In fact, we've had something in the upwards of 200 different internal border arrangements over the past year, with some various nuances between states and territories. What I can assure New Zealand travelling public is that we're a clean book at the moment. I mean, across Australia, in essence, you can travel seamlessly inside our country, so you can go from New South Wales to Queensland to Victoria and so forth. As I think Western Australia have a couple of very minor changes to that. So in essence, we are a free and open country, and particularly and importantly along the east coast of Australia, which is the closest point to New Zealand by air or by sea. You've got a clean bill of health.
But Simon, you would have to accept that could change at any point in time.
We've been living it, Lisa, and you're absolutely right. We've had numbers of changes, and they can happen pretty quickly, which has been, from the travel and tourism industry's point of view, the really disappointing aspect of the COVID-19 response is we're all for strong public health requirements and a strong, robust response to maintain, particularly at the international border, a cleanliness, if you like, at the border. Where it has been frustrating is where a number of states and territories have at various times applied hard border arrangements, and it's true. I live in the state of Victoria, and the government of Victoria put a hard border on New South Wales as of New Year's Eve. That was in place for around about 3.5 weeks. In Queensland, which has had a lot of publicity over the past year, at various times had very hard borders in place with a number of states, and Western Australia has had probably been the most consistent around a hard border arrangement at various times. I think what's important to understand, though, is water has passed under the bridge along the way now, because we have such low levels of community transmission of COVID. In fact, many would argue, in essence, we don't currently have community transmission of the virus, which is why we have open internal borders, that we've very much got over the hump of this. Obviously, we do have return visitors into hotel quarantine, Australians returning to our country from overseas, and they go into a mandatory 14-day quarantine arrangement at this point.
So on both sides of the ditch, industry is screaming out for this. But what modelling have you got around potential demand? How much do travellers want it?
Well, I think travellers want it. It's a good question, and so I've seen some recent data that shows that around about a bit over 50% of Australians are really prepared to get up and travel, not just interstate, but then to consider an international visit. The biggest handbrake for travel, and it's coming through survey after survey, and in fact it's through our industry organisation as well. We tend to focus on the enterprise concerns rather than the consumer concerns, because we're a member body that looks after small businesses. The handbrake is actually the fear of travelling across a border and then having the jurisdiction make a change, if that makes sense. It's actually not a fear of the virus. It's actually a fear of being trapped or being restricted once you get there and you've got no recourse. So that's been the biggest handbrake, if you like, which is why we've had quite a sluggish return of the domestic tourism industry in Australia, which it represents on any given day at least 70% of the overall tourism market here in Australia. We're lucky in a way that we have a domestic market, a very strong one, just like New Zealand, although I would argue probably the domestic market in percentage terms is even more important on a pro rata basis than it is in New Zealand. That's the issue, is around the fear that borders will change. That saying, I really think both Australian and New Zealand governments have a great opportunity here. They've been talking travel bubbles for the best part of 9 months. Let's have a reality check. We have no community transmission, in essence, in both sides of the country. There's enough of a health layer or health envelope, if you like, between the countries. Let's find a way and a means and try to get a two-way bubble moving.
And that's Simon Westaway from the Australian Tourism Industry Council. Disability campaigners gathered on the steps of Parliament today asking to have a seat at the table. A quarter of the population have disabilities, but campaigners say they aren't represented in Parliament. Charlotte Cook and visual journalist Dom Thomas were at the rally.
From not being able to scan COVID-19 QR codes to giving up your benefits if you want to get married. These are just some of the roadblocks the disability community face. Gerard Zavachis has lived in his car for nearly 19 years. During that time, he says he's battled the welfare system to try and make ends meet while paying big medical bills. He says having an invisible disability makes it even harder to be heard.
When I say, please help me get better and I can get off your books and move on with life, they're only interested in the short-term solution.
Juliana Carvalho has been fighting for 18 years to stay in New Zealand. She says she's seen as a potential cost and burden. She and other people with disabilities are stopped from getting a residency. Juliana delivered a petition of more than 37,000 signatures to get that changed. She says this isn't about her, it's about changing a system which discriminates against people with disabilities.
I promise you, we are way more resilient and creative and we managed to survive through this world that is not designed for us. We can definitely contribute.
Māori Party co-leader Debbie Ngariwa-Paka told the group of protesters this morning her niece died. The little girl with disabilities was not expected to live past age 4, but survived to see 22.
We saw the pain that the whānau went through to just give her the beauty of freedom and dignity. And Marika, I mihi to you today and to all of those of you here today that teach us in every way what discrimination takes away and the opportunities they don't afford for the absolute magic you have within you and your whānau.
Dr. Huhana Hiki has been campaigning for disability rights for years and says change is needed.
The next generation need to hear the wero, need to hear the challenge, that it's time. Your voices need to be heard and you don't need to be afraid anymore. They are listening, so we need to make it very clear. We want to be at the table, but we don't want to just be there talking. We want to be there making the decisions, and it has to be by us, not by others making them for us.
She handed over a box filled with personal stories, among them one from a family who spent 30 years not knowing they could access help. Another family carried their dad around because they couldn't afford a wheelchair. The Associate Minister for Social Development and Employment, Priyanka Radhakrishnan, accepted the box and said the government is committed to improving accessibility. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Charlotte Cook.
OK, we're coming up to the 6 o'clock news, but time for some of your feedback on housing, and there's been a lot of it. This listener says, regarding the house package, finally a real attempt to do something about the housing crisis. It will take years to fix a problem that has grown over several generations. Keith's got in touch. Keith says, I listened to the interview with Megan Woods. I'm a reasonably intelligent person. I hardly understood a word of what she said. When is someone going to solve this housing problem? When is the solution going to be easily understood? Thanks for getting in touch, Keith. Lynn from Christchurch says, bravo, finally some action by Labour to redress the unfair financial incentives property speculators have had that has put home ownership out of reach of our young New Zealanders. Another listener says, we all know there should be a capital gains tax. Shame Labour ruled it out, but the Bright Line test probably does a better, more targeted job anyway. And this one, we've been trying to build a home for 4 months and still don't even have a hole in the ground. Local council paperwork is ridiculous and slow. More on this after 6.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata at the NA. A woman who stayed at the Grand Millennium Managed Isolation Hotel in Auckland wants a close look at whether staff have been following the rules. A cleaner there tested positive for COVID-19 yesterday. Tauranga woman Cindy Stutz says that when she was at the hotel in January, staff were too relaxed, chatting to returnees without masks or social distancing.
It's costing a lot of people a lot of money to stay in managed isolation, and it's a bit of a slap in the face, I feel, for good law, rule-abiding people, more or less penalized for leaving the country when they've got people within their own walls that aren't taking it seriously.
It's still being determined how the cleaner caught the virus after being vaccinated against it. Parliament has gone into urgency so the government can push through changes to the Bright Line test in its housing package unveiled this morning. In a bid to cool the market, the length of time investors can hold on to a property to avoid paying tax when they sell it has been doubled from 5 years to 10. Legislation for other changes, including removing the ability of property investors to offset interest expenses against rental income, will be passed at a later date. However, those changes will also apply from this weekend. The founder of Home Ownership Pathway, which works with Pasifika families wanting to enter the housing market, says today's announcement may actually make it harder for Pasifika first home buyers. Andrew Lavulavu says the tax changes will prompt investors to pass on costs to renters.
Pasifika are going to end up losing long term because once these come into full effect, you can just see the rental prices in key areas such as South Auckland, close to work, close to employment, just increase to the point where the Pacific are going to have to move out to the regions.
Andrew Lavulavu of Home Ownership Pathway. A prominent businessman has been found guilty of indecently assaulting 3 young men. A High Court jury in Auckland returned unanimous verdicts today. Jean Bell was there.
The Crown said the man indecently touched the men and took advantage of the power imbalance between them and him. It said he then tried to bribe a complainant to drop the allegations. The defence case was that the allegations were made up after the men sought financial support from the accused and did not receive it. The man, whose name remains suppressed, was found guilty on 3 charges of indecent assault and 2 of attempting to dissuade a witness. He has been remanded for sentencing on May the 6th. Called Jean Bell, TNA.
The Marist Brothers have made a formal apology for any historical abuse by any of its members. It says the system the order operated by in the past allowed for abusers to move around the country and the abuse to be covered up. At the Royal Commission of Inquiry in Auckland today, the Marist Professional Standards Delegate Peter Horeed said that meant abusers were not stopped when they should have been.
People, sadly, were abused when this abuse was avoidable. The brothers recognise that this was wrong and that inadequate safeguards were in place to protect against the vulnerabilities of this system.
Brother Horeed apologised to survivors for the Marist Brothers' shortcomings, failings and mistakes. A justice advocate has added her voice to calls for a review of the women's prison system to be widened. A judge has found 2 inmates of Auckland Women's Prison were treated in a cruel, degrading way, and Corrections has since admitted it did not act in accordance with the law. Julia Whaiporti says the whole prison system needs overhauling.
We've seen some of those calls anyway from what the Hokairangi strategy had called for, Corrections' own strategy, but has obviously not been implemented or given effect. It absolutely needs to extend to the whole prison system, our youth justice facilities, and all of those in the care of corrections.
The Corrections Minister Calvin Davis has admitted the department got its handling of the situation wrong. It's 4 minutes past 6. Bangladesh have set the Black Caps 273 to win the second one-day cricket international in Christchurch. The tourists made 271 for 6 in their 50 overs, and New Zealand's run chase will begin in 10 minutes. Meanwhile, the Wellington batsman Finn Allen has been called into the Black Caps for the first time, being named in the T20 squad for the 3-match series against Bangladesh. The 21-year-old opener was the leading run scorer in the domestic T20 competition. Central District's batsman Will Young has been named in the T20 squad for the first time, and fast bowlers Lockie Ferguson and Adam Milne return after injury layoffs. Missing from the squad are Kane Williamson, Trent Boult, Mitchell Santner, Kyle Jamieson, Jimmy Neesham and Tim Seifert, all of whom are being rested ahead of the IPL series. The Wellington Phoenix's preparations for tomorrow night's game against bottom-placed Melbourne Victory have been disrupted by the torrential rain hitting New South Wales. While the Phoenix are based in Wollongong, 100 kilometres from the worst affected areas in Sydney, coach Ufik Talay says the rain has restricted training.
Yeah, the weather has been terrible. So at the moment we're chopping and changing and finding parts of the field where we can actually do a proper session. So I'm hoping that the field holds up this morning so we can actually get onto the park and do things. Otherwise, we'll have to use some indoor facilities.
The weather is forecast to improve markedly over the next 24 hours. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights,
Tony Stamp samples new albums from Jed Parsons, Jordan Govt and UK post-punks Shame. Writer, cook and adventurer Annabel Langbein discusses her life and work, from possum trapping to celebrity chefing, not sure that's a word, and Patrick Phelps from Minerals West Coast has his take on the report of the Climate Change Commission. If we're in a hole, is it time we stopped digging? Check out his answer on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Wellington, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Mainly fine. A few showers in Northland and cloudy areas overnight. Isolated afternoon and evening showers tomorrow from Tongariro northwards. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairadapa mostly fine. However, cloud increasing later tomorrow with areas of drizzle from Wairoa northwards by evening. Marlborough and Nelson mostly fine. However, drizzle for the Kaikoura coast tomorrow morning and evening, with isolated showers about the ranges tomorrow afternoon and evening. Bulla and Westland, cloudy periods, but long, fine spells for Bulla. In Canterbury, Otago, Southland and Fiordland, cloudy in Clutha, Southland and elsewhere about the coast, with patchy drizzle developing there tonight. Partly cloudy elsewhere, but overcast morning and night, with isolated afternoon or evening showers. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and the odd shower. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen taku ingoa. The government's new housing fix-it package will do nothing to help first home buyers, according to a market expert who reckons it's time to go back to the drawing board. The suite of changes includes doubling the Bright Line test to 10 years and increasing the income and house price caps for first home grants and loans. CEO of First Home Coach, Matt Taylor, sees today's announcement as a bit of a missed opportunity, and he joins me now. Matt, sum it up for me. What do you make of these suite of changes announced by the government?
Oh, hi, Lisa. Thanks for having me on. In a word, underwhelming. I think it's a token gesture from a government where first-home buyers have been waiting 5 long years for a review of these key assistance packages, and they do make a difference, the packages themselves, but I just don't think the proposed changes go far enough to help first-home buyers.
So what's underwhelming about it specifically?
Yeah, so the first home grant and the first home loan have 2 key eligibility criteria. The first is around the income. So the income caps were never really the problem. So 79% of our users on the First Home Coach platform, where people can make their home buying plan, so it's real data, real people kind of trying to get on the first home ladder. So 79% of couples are already meeting the previous 130 income cap. With the increase to 150,000, this will mean that 92% of couples will now meet that income criteria. So pretty much everyone. So that's fine. The real grind, I suppose, comes where the government has continually set this house price cap well below where the market is priced. So the previous cap of 650,000 in Auckland was set in 2016. 5 years later, we've now got a cap increasing by 8% or 50,000 to 700k. Meanwhile, median house prices in our largest city have increased 31% over that same period to 1.1 million. So,
and Matt, we should be clear that cap that you've just used as an example is for a new property, so a new build. It is lower for an existing house that you may wish to purchase in Auckland. The cap is 600. The new cap will be 625,000. What do you get for that?
That's right. Not much. So, yeah, it's kind of, like I say, it's well out of the range where we're seeing prices now in market. So, you know, the government had a key opportunity here to really make an impact for first home buyers. I just think they've missed the mark on this one.
So paint me a picture. If you're in the Auckland market, what have you got generally to stump up for a deposit?
So you're looking at a 20% deposit. So, you know, if you're not going to be looking at probably the median of $1 million or 1.1. So, you know, you're going to still have to have the best part of 150k in deposit to get your foot on the ladder, which is a significant amount of money, right? So we're seeing increasingly the bank of mum and dad coming in, helping some people onto the property ladder, and that can come in all shapes and sizes with kind of loans, gifts, guarantees. But
so that's how people are getting over the line.
Yeah. I mean, that is increasingly, unfortunately, becoming part of the solution. So, like I say, the serviceability of loans. So you've got kind of two key things in play here. So whether you can actually make the repayments and whether you can actually afford the deposit. What we're seeing is people can absolutely make the repayments. That's basically what they're already paying in rent, if not a little bit less. They may be saving some money by getting a mortgage, which is kind of bizarre. But the big kind of sticking point is actually getting that deposit together. So we see first-home buyers really relying on key policy from the government here, like the first-home buyer grant, to kind of boost their deposit up. And it's not an insignificant amount of money. It's $20,000 towards their new home, potentially for a new build. So, like I say, the eligibility criteria, they had a real opportunity today to make a statement, but I think they've really just paying lip service to first-home buyers.
So what would you have done? When you talk about the eligibility criteria, give us some numbers.
Yeah, cool. So if you just look purely at the house price cap, so that's where we're seeing the most friction. So basically what we see is if you had taken that all the way to 900,000, that would have seen over 88% of first-home buyers actually becoming eligible. At the moment, if you're leaving it down at 700, you're only seeing kind of 43% of our users on First Home Coach being eligible for that key grant. So if it was me, I would, hats off to them. They're kind of using the right tools here. So the right set of tools are in play. It's just they haven't gone far enough on the house price caps, I think.
Really appreciate your time. That is Matt Taylor, who's the CEO of First Home Coach. Ports of Auckland bosses have been meeting Auckland councillors behind closed doors this afternoon. Tensions have been rising over mounting safety and performance concerns. The meeting has just wrapped up and Auckland's Deputy Mayor, Bill Cashmore, joins me now. Kia ora, Bill. How would you describe the tone and feel of that meeting?
Kia ora, Lisa. There was some tension in the air, but there was also, I think, an increased level of understanding around our table about each organisations like the council and the ports, where each party sits as far as the ports legislation is concerned, and also about the complexity and challenges of running a port during these COVID times and international constraints and movements of shipping and so forth. So there's a lot at play.
Were you satisfied with the answers you got, Bill?
I think satisfied would probably be too strong a word. We are moving in a better place, and I really take my hat off and thanks to Bill Osborne, Wirima Osborne and Tony Gibson for showing up and answering the questions as they did in a pretty forthright and straight up manner. And they sort of really outlined where they've come from, what they're doing, and what they are going to be doing, probably even most important. And there's going to be some good news, touch wood, coming towards the middle of the year as the automation gets landed 100%.
Okay, so a couple of things there, Bill. If it's going too far to say you were satisfied with the answers, where is the deficit of information still? So
there's some councillors who are wanting information that's probably where the ports say that is a board matter, it has nothing to do with council.
What information, Bill?
I'm not going to say, Lisa, the meeting was in confidence, so I'm not going to go down that track, I'm sorry. And this is a matter we're going to have to work with the ports to increase the level of trust, understanding and transparency. And those things don't get delivered overnight.
Here's the thing, Bill. Who owns the port?
Auckland Council owns the port, but it's set up under its own legislation, so it's not like another council CCO.
But so if they want to be transparent and honest, Bill, why are they scuttling behind closed doors?
Simply because there's a huge amount of commercial sensitivity around this stuff, Lisa. Shipping companies are pretty cutthroat and tough. There's a lot of inter-port competition in New Zealand. And so there's information that was disclosed today that was commercially sensitive and it had to be behind closed doors.
Was any information passed back and forth about safety of workers?
Yes.
So that's not commercially sensitive, is it? How many workers are getting injured there?
So there's one port that reports on health and safety that's just about to be landed, and the port management and chair of the board said they're adopting all the recommendations of that report. We haven't seen it as councillors yet. It is with the ports currently, and they're just fulfilling in the detail. We hope to see it by the end of this week or early next week.
Okay, so Bill...
But there was a second report for the Maritime Association, which is potentially more challenging, and we don't know what's in that yet. And that comes with some health and safety repercussions potentially.
Okay, so there's really high interest in this report that you're talking about that you reckon's coming down the pipe soon. When exactly?
Well, I can't answer that. The Ports lawyer said he was trying to get it done this week. It is imminent, this week or early next.
So what problem does the Ports lawyer have with the report as it stands?
They just want to make sure the accuracy and the detail.
Right, and so you say that they have told you that they will adopt all the recommendations in that report?
They are in the process of doing so. They say they have adopted more than 50% of them so far.
But Bill, you're telling me you don't even know what those recommendations are. So how can you check up?
Well, we will check up once we've seen and read the report. There will be an audit process for sure.
So what did you talk about around safety? So what are these these stop work injuries? What can you tell me about those?
I haven't got the detail on that, I'm sorry.
Did you discuss those injuries during the meeting?
No.
Okay, so what did they tell you about how they're keeping their workers safe or not?
So they're adopting these recommendations. They're telling us they're putting in place a whole raft of new measures of cordons, and that's one of the good things about the automation is that people are actually excluded from the area, so there's no interface between the automated straddle carriers and humans or stevedores. So there's a whole raft of measures, Lisa. It's quite complex, and they're also now looking at methods of auditing their own safety proposals, which is positive. They have a record that they've got to fix and get right here. No one should have to go to work with the fear they might not come home.
Bill, are you convinced that workers are safe there?
I think there's an element of risk no matter what job you're in, Lisa.
Understand that, Bill, but I am asking you specifically about a port that has a checkered track record recently regarding safety. Bill, this is really important. Are workers safe at that port?
I can't give a categorical answer to that, Lisa, because I'm not responsible for the port's working days. What we as an owner of the ports are responsible for is setting the right policies in place as far as we can as with the legislation and appointing board directors to ensure that health and safety is the forefront and foremost of their thinking.
Based on the information you have from them, what's your feeling about safety there?
I think it's improving. I think if what we're hearing is coming through and is reality, then I would say the health and safety issues should be improving, and technology is a large part in that. But I'm yet to see the final results, and it'll be very, very closely watched by the governors around the council table.
Bill, you mentioned the board chair from Ports of Auckland and the CEO. Were they happy with their performance? Did they express that they were pretty happy with where they were at?
I spoke to them as they were leaving and said thank you. I've expressed thanks to them for coming, and I think thank them for the forthrightness of their answers. I didn't ask them if they were happy or not. That's not really my business.
Do you think that do they think their performance is up to scratch?
Oh, I think they recognise they've had faults and weaknesses. No one would say the port's perfect, because it's not. But they are concentrating. Bill Osborne, the chair, is really focused on port improvement, especially in health and safety, but also in throughput and performance generally.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Auckland's Deputy Mayor, Bill Cashmore. It is 19 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The Grand Millennium Managed Isolation Hotel is once again under scrutiny as authorities probe how a cleaner became infected with COVID-19. This afternoon, officials revealed what they've learnt about the case since the asymptomatic woman tested positive in routine surveillance testing. There's 1 weak positive result in a family member, 2 colleagues sent to isolate, and 1 location of interest identified, a countdown store. As Katie Todd reports, there are calls for a close look at any potential mingling between staff and returnees.
The new case doesn't particularly surprise Tauranga woman Cindy Stutz, who stayed at the Grand Millennium on her way home from Germany in January. She says she witnessed staff and returnees chatting without masks or social distancing on 2 occasions and feels her complaints were shrugged off.
I saw a security guard and guest of the hotel just having a chit-chat in the hallway. Neither one of them were wearing a mask. They both just kind of turned and looked at me like it was, no big thing. They were standing well within, I would say, half a meter to a meter of each other. And, so I just kind of went on about my business, got back to my room, rang downstairs to the reception desk and explained what I had encountered. And they were just like, oh, okay, thank you very much for that.
Health authorities keen to know exactly how the cleaner picked up COVID-19 have headed straight to the lab today, studying its epidemiology and genomic sequencing to see if it's linked to 8 other returnees who tested positive while staying at the hotel. They're also probing a weak positive COVID-19 test result in a family member of the cleaner, while 3 other relatives have tested negative. COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins says authorities are also looking at the movements of returnees and staff in the hotel using the CCTV cameras that were installed last month after virus transmission at the Pullman MIQ hotel.
Most of them have been installed and are operating, so that will certainly help us. It gives us visibility of most of the common areas in that facility, and that will all help with the investigation.
But E2 Union, which represents workers at the Grand Millennium, wants a full review of the health and safety processes at the hotel. Organiser Matt Danaher hasn't heard of rules being broken, like Cindy Stutz, but he does want to know whether lax processes could be to blame for the cleaner getting the virus. Until the cause of transmission is known, he'd like staff protected with every extra precaution.
Hopefully, testing of all the workforce will be expedited, and until then, there'll be extreme caution around distancing, and, we'd expect that non-essential tasks would be halted to allow that to happen.
The cleaner who became infected is among more than 4,600 New Zealanders who have had both doses of the COVID-19 vaccine, which takes some time to fully protect against the virus. Her family is also eligible for the jab, but haven't had it yet. Chris Hipkins says there are 2,200 people now trained to administer vaccines, and about 300 to 400 of them are already at work, getting through about 2,000 vials of the vaccine each day. It's just over a month since the first border workers had a jab, and Hipkins says the vast majority have now been vaccinated.
We know that it's above 90%. The feedback that we have had from the hotel manager at the Grand Millennium is that they're comfortable that they are well above 90%.
A notification is being sent out on the COVID Tracer app to people who were at Countdown Mount Roskill on Saturday afternoon from 3 o'clock to 3:15, suggesting they monitor their health and get tested if they have any COVID symptoms. It's the only location of interest identified so far in relation to the new case, and a Countdown spokesperson says the store closed for deep cleaning this afternoon. The government maintains it's a limited exposure, so the new case presents a low risk to the community. For Checkpoint, ko Katie Todd, TNA.
Fighting back tears, the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison has promised he is listening to women. In an extraordinary media conference today, he called for urgent change following recent sexual harassment and assault allegations. World Watch's Max Toll has more.
Scott Morrison is under pressure, even if he won't admit it.
If you were the boss of a business and there'd been an alleged rape on your watch, and this incident we heard about last night on your watch, your job would probably be in a bit of jeopardy, wouldn't it? Doesn't it look like you've lost control of your ministerial staff here?
Well, I'll let you editorialise as you like, Andrew. But if anyone in this room wants to offer up the standards in their own workplaces by comparison, I'd invite you to do so.
Well, they're better than these, I would suggest.
Well,
Australia is in the midst of a major moment in regards to harassment and assault allegations made by women that go beyond Parliament House. The government's response has been criticised, and Scott Morrison has been accused of misleading Parliament in regards to exactly who knew about Brittany Higgins's alleged rape. Yet today, he painted himself as a man of empathy.
Please don't think that these events haven't created great turmoil for me over the course of the past month, when I'm dealing with many other issues at the same time, also very significant, whether it's floods or vaccines or COVID pandemics, international issues. Australians are also expecting me to be focusing on those as well. So that's my honest answer. It's processed, I've heard, I've listened, and I'll have a lot more to say about this in the next month.
A Parliament House security guard on duty the night of the alleged rape of Brittany Higgins has spoken out for the first time about what happened. Nicola Anderson recalled finding Miss Higgins in the office of the then Defence Minister in 2019 and rejected Scott Morrison's claim that Miss Higgins and the man she's accused breached security when they returned to Parliament House late at night.
What was the security breach? Because the night that we were on shift, there was no security breach. Because they didn't have their passes on them, we've had to look up their surnames. We've noticed that they're current, they're active, it's all good. So therefore we proceeded to sign them in individually on a positively identified green pass.
2 other women, another staffer and a coalition volunteer, have made sexual assault allegations about the same man Brittany Higgins accuses. Meanwhile, Mr Morrison's Attorney-General has been accused of an historic rape. And until now, the Prime Minister has been accused of failing to speak plainly about an important moment unfolding for women in Australia. This, after all, was more than 8 years ago.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. I will not.
At a recent rally, Brittany Higgins called for action.
We are all here today, not because we want to be here, but because we have to be here. We fundamentally recognise the system is broken. The glass ceiling is still in place, and there are significant failings in the power structures within our institutions. We are here because it's unfathomable that we are still having to fight this same stale, tired fight.
Yet, Scott Morrison said today wasn't the right day to spell out what actions his government would take next, but instead to remind the public he is aware of the problem.
If we were to just continue to focus on the events that happen in this place, and we will, and must, as I said, there is something much bigger here that has been illuminated, thankfully, by these rather traumatic reports that have gone right across the spectrum here.
Scott Morrison will now have to back up his comments today and lead a drive to improve the treatment of women in Parliament. If he doesn't, it could be the biggest failing of his term. For Checkpoint, Max Toll.
Efforts to clean up the massive amounts of debris floating around in space are underway. A British company plans to send satellites into space to act like a magnet. The BBC's Jonathan Amos has more.
Is this the start of a new era? A Russian rocket flies skyward on a mission to showcase how the space industry can finally start to deal with its dirty secret, orbital debris. More than 60 years of space activity have left millions of discarded pieces of metal and other materials littering the skies overhead. Everything from old rocket segments to accidentally dropped astronaut tools, even flecks of paint. The space industry is finally realising that unless we start removing some of the bigger junk items, we run the risk of collisions that will destroy the active satellites that provide our communications and weather forecasts. Enter the Astroscale company, with a division in the UK, which launched its clean-up demonstration on Monday's rocket. It'll use one satellite to magnetically grab another, a dummy in this instance, and pull it down to Earth. The manoeuvres involved will be complex.
The key bit is to capture a tumbling object. So if a satellite fails, it can quite easily start tumbling, and that makes it considerably harder to capture it. So that is our key technology.
Astroscale believes a vibrant market will emerge this decade in which spacecraft owners contract other operators to either service and repair hardware in orbit or tow it out of harm's way. This should keep orbits free and safe for everyone to continue using.
Jonathan Amos with that story. Now, we've been talking a lot about housing tonight and the package unveiled by the government today. Minister Megan Woods was on earlier in the programme. Robin's got in touch to say, who did she think was listening? I've never heard such a lot of twaddle in regards to this vital issue of this housing. What the government needs to do is bore out the rail tunnel at Swanson, Waitakere, open up the west to Helensville and beyond. There is heaps of land out there, but no infrastructure to support housing. The Northwestern motorway is clogged already. Where is the common sense, says Robin? Nowhere to be seen. Don't forget, you can check out all our stories online, particularly our video clips. We'll put them up on our Facebook page. First up, back first thing.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Green Party doesn't think the government's housing package addresses the scale of the crisis, while the National Party accuses Labour of breaking its promise and turning the Bright Line test into a full-scale capital gains tax. A leading vaccinologist says despite a full immunised MIQ testing positive for COVID-19, the vaccine did its job of stopping her getting sick. A High Court jury in Auckland has found a prominent businessman guilty of indecently assaulting 3 young men. A police officer is among those shot dead in a massacre in the US in a supermarket in Colorado. A controversial satellite from Rocket Lab